Okay, so we're really happy to welcome Mathis today. He's twice a WSDC alumna. He has done his bachelor's in life sciences at Yale-NUS College in Singapore, and he has been working as a research officer at the Genome Institute of Singapore, studying Parkinson's disease and glioblastoma, multiforme. He's starting his PhD next fall, which I'm sure he's going to tell you all about it. So I'm going to give the floor to Mathis, and I'm looking forward to this wonderful workshop.
Hi everyone. Uh, I made slides. Um, so I'm kind of interested and curious, and always been curious about biological enhancement as a thing that us humans can do. But today's presentation is really, um, you know, in terms of debates, like when do you see these types of topics? What do you say? Yeah. So here's my case split, because no matter how many years after debate, um, like no matter how many years pass after you debate, you still have certain habits. So here's my case split. I'm gonna introduce myself. I'm gonna frame the lecture, and then I'm gonna give you like a short factual um, info dump on genome editing and brain-machine interfaces. And then lastly, we'll go into the debate land. And frankly, I was thinking that it would be cool if I can like make some of the students in the class come up with the arguments, so that everyone can like actively learn. We can see in the chat if you guys are up for that. But yeah, who am I? So I went to my Google Drive today and I found a few photos. Here's me in 2017, looking young, and 2018, just after graduating high school. Uh, a few of my accolades for my debating career. Um, in Indonesia, we didn't do so well. 2017, we got 2 wins only because we got like a really hard, I think, really hard draw. It was the last year when they had like a random WSDC draw where, um, where like it wasn't power ranked. So like if you have 2 wins, you debate against a team that has 2 wins, and if it's 3 wins, you debate against the teams that have 3 wins. I don't remember how that's called. In 2018, we broke and we went to the octo finals. So that was great. Um, I'm from Kaunas. I went to Kaunas Jesuit Gymnasium. For my bachelor's, I went to Singapore. I went to Yale-NUS College, where I studied life sciences. After I graduated, I've been working for 3 years at the Genome Institute of Singapore. So this is my actual job. I work on, if I have to like just, dump certain keywords, what I do, I work in Parkinson's disease, glioblastoma. I work with these things called midbrain organoids, which are these like stem cell derived kind of mini brains, you could say, although mini brains is kind of frowned upon. I'm a scientist, I shouldn't use those types of terms. And I also work in single cell genomics, multi-omics, because it's not only just genes, there's also protein, high throughput assays that I work with. And I recently got into a PhD program at McGill in Canada, in Montreal. And my putative projects ideas are still going to be functional genomics, depression, early life adversity. So all this biology and enhancement stuff is kind of close to my heart and also professionally aligned with what I do. So let's frame this lecture. So it's not going to be a complete literature review, just going to give you some first principles on what you can use in debates. The emphasis is going to be on logic and ethical considerations as opposed to biological mechanisms. Um, yeah, I focused on genome editing brain-machine interfaces. I did a bit of like research as to what kinds of motions there have been, at least on the internet, when it comes to like enhancement, and those two seem to be coming up with higher frequency. Sorry, lately. Yeah, and debate-wise, this is gonna be a bit about, you understanding what is what, so you can call out your opponents in the beginning of the debate if they're like speaking something completely preposterous, unrealistic. Yeah. And in a way, it's also gonna help you with characterizing stuff. I would prefer if you ask questions. I have a feeling that this is gonna be a very timid audience today. Um, so you can just write a message in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask the questions, not a problem. Okay. So let's talk about genome editing and brain-machine interfaces, BMIs, as I'm going to refer to them from this point onwards. What is gene editing? Well, we should probably start from the idea of the central dogma um, in biology, which is that everyone has DNA and that DNA gets transcribed, kind of, you could think read into mRNA, messenger RNA, and then it gets translated to proteins that are made out of polypeptides. Okay. So genome editing happens at the first level, right? If you change the DNA here, then it gets transferred into mRNA, and then it gets made into proteins, and you are a protein, right? Like everything, almost everything you have on you is proteins, right? So whenever there's like a topic about genome editing and genetic editing, they're talking about changing the DNA, this code. Now, the most commonly referred to genetic editing tool is called CRISPR-Cas9, which is basically this. Um, you could think about it as genetic scissors, right? So it's a combination of a few proteins that produce a what's called double-stranded break in the DNA, and then you break it, and then you can have like a template that's gonna insert whatever gene you want to insert, for example, into that break, or you can just introduce a deletion without adding anything in, right? That's essentially how it works. Just a snip. Um, and usually people refer to CRISPR-Cas9 because it's like the cheapest, fastest, most accurate. The other technologies like Talon or the zinc finger nucleases, they work, but they're like harder to use from what I understand, and also they suffer from what's called off-target gene editing. Essentially, it means that you're not just gonna snip where you want the scissors to snip, they're gonna snip in a random place in the genome. And some genes you don't want to snip because if you snip them, then you can get like cancer and stuff like that, if it's an oncogene, for example. Uh, can I see my notes on this? 1 second. How do I see my notes? Um, I do slideshow and I think I go like this. Presenter mode. Okay. Okay, let me share it back on screen. Okay. Do I see? Okay. Do you guys see how I'm changing the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. So who is this guy, right? His name is He Liankui. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but it's a famous Chinese scientist because he edited three human embryos. The most two famous twins are called Lula and Nana, and he's from Shenzhen, which is in China. And basically, the idea was that he wanted to help people who have HIV-related fertility problems. So in this case, it was an HIV positive father and an HIV negative mother, and they wanted to have children, but in China, you can't have children if one of the parents is HIV positive using in vitro fertilization. But because of the scientific study, they were able to undergo, they were like recruited by the university by this guy, right, for the study. And what was interesting is what he did is he basically took the sperm and the egg from the mother. So the sperm has HIV positive father sperm, right? And they did in vitro fertilization, which essentially means you put the egg and the sperm in a petri dish together. And what this guy did is he edited one gene called CCR5, which encodes this protein that the HIV virus recognizes when it's trying to enter a cell. So the idea is that by editing out or like deleting this gene, a single gene, you're going to be able to confer genetic resistance to the babies that are going to be born through in vitro fertilization, even though the father is HIV positive, right? So also he did that. It was a massive controversy. In fact, it sparked a moratorium, which means a global ban on genetic editing in humans. The general scientific consensus for this is that this clinical trial was not peer reviewed by others. So he was acting a lot under his own scientific guise, but also in the end, actually, he admits that um, Lula and Nana, the two twins that got this gene replaced after they were born, they still had this gene, even it wasn't completely taken out, right? Which is a common problem with CRISPR-Cas9. This is what's called genetic mosaicism. Either way, the point is these babies had this gene cut out of them, but sort of, but they kind of still don't have genetic resistance to HIV. So he did like a massive risk, right? And this guy got sentenced to 3 years in prison. So, what are some of the pros and cons of this, right? Oh, the distinction I wanted to make is, so he was doing what's called germline editing, right? And germ cells are different. Germline cells are different from your somatic cells, right? So germ cells are basically what's your reproductive cells, like in your testes if you're a man, or your ovaries if you're a woman. And if you edit those, then basically all the cells in your human body are gonna be similar, right? Because you start from a single cell and then it becomes your whole body, right? So that's called germline editing, and that is under a moratorium, right? It's not allowed. What is allowed is called somatic genome editing. So here are a few clinical applications of this, and the crucial part here is that realistically, like the state of technology right now is that you can only, yeah, like delete or remove or replace a gene where there's um, like a single allele that needs to be changed, a single letter, ACGT in the DNA code. So you might have learned in your school sickle cell disease, uh, beta thalassemia, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, Huntington's disease, cystic fibrosis is a big one. But also, this technology has been used to engineer immune cells called CAR T cells to better target tumors in cancer, especially pediatric cancers. I've seen some crazy pictures, of you give this next generation CAR T cell drug to a child that has like a brain tumor, and then it just like kind of goes away, almost like magic. So these are very real clinical applications, I think. And so whenever somebody will, like start telling you that they're gonna like genetically edit, like unless the motion says, that you need to assume this kind of technology exists, if somebody asserts that they're gonna just like genome edit and then everyone is gonna become, I don't know, like not depressed or something like that, that's not true, right? The disease has to be relatively genetically simple, and it's rare that that's the case. So some of the risks associated with gene editing, even of somatic cells, is an immune response. These, so if you're injecting something into that protein, your immune system can recognize and think that's a foreign body and cause a massive immune inflammation. Um, there's also mosaicism. So there's two copies of a gene, right? One from your mother, one from your father. You might be able to remove one, but not the other, which means that, as in the case of Lula and Nana before, you might still have the trait for which the gene encodes, even though you underwent this risky procedure, right? So it's not completely efficient. Um, Jesse Gelsinger is this famous guy uh, who died in 1999. He had this basically X-linked genetic disease in the liver, which basically made that he couldn't metabolize ammonia, which is a common side product of protein synthesis and protein metabolism. Sorry. So the point was he could manage, right? He could survive on a restricted diet and special medications, but it was like kind of hard to live. So he went to UPenn actually to get a gene corrected in 1999. It was slightly different technology back then, right? He had like this like viral vector injected into him that was carrying the correct gene. But he died 4 days after the procedure at the age of 18 because of a massive immune reaction that happened to him. And basically, what happened is that 15 years after, mm, like it sparked like a massive controversy in the medical field because this was someone who could have survived without this treatment, but he chose to undergo it, and he died, quite unnecessarily. So that's a cautionary tale for what can happen with these types of technologies and what can go wrong. Yeah. So here's the second thing, brain-machine interfaces. Uh, so BMIs are basically a way for your brain to communicate directly to some kind of electrical interface. And it's done by adding this like little pin that records electrical signals. So these are labeled escaped electrical signals. There's no such thing, but the point is that your neurons are going to be sending electrical pulses that are encoding certain things that you want to do. You want to like lift up your arm, you're going to send electrical signals. You want to, I don't know, say something, it's going to send electrical signal. And basically, what happens is that these electrodes, they kind of take in that information and they decode it and then they send it to somewhere else. Now, in reality, if we ignore this, um, you could think about it like it looks more like this, right? So you have kind of like a way bigger than this electrode. They're pretty usually big. It's quite invasive. So you will have like this kind of thing sticking out of your head at all times, like right now. There's usually a pacemaker kind of thing because it needs to have some kind of electricity to kind of keep it going and keep it decoding the information, right? Because you don't want to be like, putting in um, batteries into it, And yeah, and this I think is referring to if to like the little needles, how it looks. But it doesn't always have to be this invasive. It can also be something akin to a hat like this, which I think this is kind of like called electroencephalography. And the point is that it's kind of looking at the brain oscillations in your brain. So nothing is implanted per se inside your brain. The only problem with these types of devices versus these is that they're much slower. So imagine that you're like controlling a mouse, right, on your computer with your brain, right? You're not moving your hand through the brain machine interface. This will be like, 5 seconds after you think it's gonna move the mouse. With this, it's much slower. It's like 40 seconds after you think about something, it's gonna happen. So it's not very practical for most applications. These are the clinical applications of brain machine interfaces and the corresponding risks. There should be four, not five. So neuroprosthetics, it allows paralyzed individuals to control robotic limbs or computer cursors. I think that's a really big one, and that's what we're seeing happening right now. Restorative therapies. So sometimes you might lose sensory function like hearing, and it could be helpful for you to have a brain machine interface to supplement your sensory function. Communication. So some people are paraplegic, for example, and they can't communicate. Um, this is a way for them to control some kind of virtual keyboard, for example. Neuromodulation. So this is helpful because certain conditions like Parkinson's disease patients benefit from basically implanting an electrode and stimulating certain specific brain areas, and that has been shown to be greatly efficacious. That's done as a last resort, but is definitely a clinical application of this technology. And yeah, another, like, this is not clinical, but like cognitive enhancement, right? So here the idea is kind of like where the Neuralink people are going with the null human-computer interaction methods. There are some of the risks associated with it. So you need to undergo a surgical procedure. So there's risk of infection, bleeding, tissue damage to the brain. There's problems with device reliability, right? Because you don't want your implant to explode or short circuit while you have it in your head. There's problems with data privacy, right? Because you can imagine how much data does a BMI device generate in and of itself, right? This is like we're talking about some decoding what someone is thinking, right? So you need a lot of information to reliably decode that kind of signal. And yeah, so this is kind of related to the first one where there's also an immune response locally in your brain when you implant something. So everyone talks about Neuralink, and I thought I will like clarify how is Neuralink different from brain-machine interfaces and what exactly it is. So like Neuralink implants, the N1 implant it's basically a BMI, right? The whole the whole idea is nothing novel really, but what is kind of elegant. Okay, well, first of all, they're raising way more money than poor scientists, right? But the other thing is uh, they're trying to scale it, right? And they're trying to go into this land of transhumanism where you're going to be able to, um, you know, decide that you want to get a brain implant, go to your local hospital, and after 30 minutes of a surgery that is done to you by a robot, so minimized chance of any kind of complications related to surgeries, right? Because this is automated and perfect, presumably. You're gonna just leave the hospital and you're gonna come back and you're gonna be able to, scroll TikTok without even thinking about it, right? So that's kind of the idea. They're trying to scale it and trying to make it mainstream, but it's not a technically novel and crazy idea. They're also trying to make it way smaller because you don't want a big thing sticking out of your head. Okay, so if you guys are still not completely bored of me, is there any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Um,
Yeah.
when you talked about the gene editing and about that Chinese scientist, maybe I misheard or I didn't hear. So he failed to do so, and does the gene become recessive and kind of inactive, or does it still possess like the harmful HAV traits, and then these children still have them? Like,
So he basically tried to turn it off, right?
yeah,
But the way I understand it is he turned off like 40% of it, you know? So the risk of the baby still developing HIV because their father is HIV positive still exists. It wasn't 100%, the snipping wasn't 100% effective. I would say like 40% effective. That's the idea.
yeah, okay, thanks.
In a way, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So debate land. Um, what do I want to say about this? Okay. Maybe I'll just give my spiel and then I'll stop when I will want interaction with you guys. Okay. So this is how I think about categories of human enhancement. I would think there's like three of them, biologically speaking. There's the physical, reproductive, and mental. So the physical one is the one that we like kind of talk about the most, and it can be things like, aesthetics, like plastic surgery, orthodontics. It could also be like, sports related or like movement, physical related. So like doping, physical performance enhancing drugs. It could also be like a physical arm, right? Like prosthetics powered exoskeletons. That's been used, for example, in the military. Also medical implants, so it doesn't have to just be a brain implant. It can also be like a heart implant, you know. I think it's human enhancement if you like don't die in a way, right? Organ replacement. The one I found quite interesting is gender affirming hormone therapy is also kind of said to be a human enhancing property, because technically it is not natural for your biology, right? When you're transitioning between genders. Um, and I just wanted to add the most obvious ones like exercise, sleep, and diet. In terms of reproductive, what I mean here is things like pre-implantation genetic screening. So when people have in vitro fertilization, women usually are made to undergo what's called hyperovulation. So you're going to have a bunch of different eggs that you can kind of screen for. So I know that, you know, you can screen your eggs if they have like green eyes or something like that. You can screen for those types of simple traits, not intelligence, but like, you know, that is the baby gonna have freckles or not, for example. That's controlled by a single gene. So you can genotype and screen the eggs. That's what I mean here. Selective abortion is also um, kind of reproductive enhancement, right? You know, um, if there's some kind of complication with your pregnancy, right? You don't die if you undergo an abortion and in vitro fertilization. And then the last category is mental, right? So these are like all the things that you could do that make you cognitively uh, enhanced, right? So neurostimulation, wearable electronics like smartwatches and glasses, right? We are very familiar with those. They allow you to track your vitals and nootropics. And this term nootropics means basically all the cognitive enhancers that are kind of uh, they're cognitive enhancers, but like they don't have massive side effects. So caffeine, for example, is a good example, right? Like we can drink coffee in the morning and we're gonna feel a slump at 2 p.m., but we still drink it every morning because well, we don't like get into the spiral of getting, you know, 10 espresso shots every day after drinking coffee. I mean, maybe someone does, but like and the crash is not as crazy, right? Whilst, you know, say a drug like heroin, right? You not heroin, like a stimulant like I don't know, for example, like Ritalin, right? Which is an ADHD medication that people use, but it's also used as a study drug. If you did that every day, you would get an amphetamine addiction, right? And you would have crazy psychosis for abusing a stimulant like that, right? So that's the distinction between um, a like a stimulant like amphetamine and a nootropic like caffeine or nicotine, for example. So yeah, so to sum up, I think these are kind of three nice areas of human enhancement. I think there's another axis here in terms of categorizing this, you know, what's there, and that I think is the invasiveness or how permanent the alterations are to your body. So I think the least invasive are the behavioral adaptations, you know. So basically, I think that you can, in my opinion, you can capture like, you know, like 70% of good outcomes in terms of enhancement for your life just by doing very slight behavioral adaptations, you know, sleep 8 hours, you know, don't eat McDonald's every day and like have a balanced diet. In other words, exercise, have some cardiovascular exercise for like 40 minutes a day or 30 minutes, you know, and that's gonna make a massive difference, you know. So these are not invasive and they're not permanent behavioral adaptation. Second level, I say, is pharmacological tools, right? So they're generally reversible because whatever drug you take, it goes out of your system at a certain half-life, but there can be irreversible effects that can happen from long-term consumption, right? So if you take, I don't know, if you start smoking just to stay awake, you might develop into a smoking habit that can kill you from cancer later on, right? Third level, brain-machine interfaces. So these are still kind of reversible in that you can take out an implant, but usually that will, just leave like a hole in your head, or, there will be some kind of inflammation. So in terms of invasiveness, that's definitely way more invasive than pharmacology, right? And then lastly, somatic gene editing. So this is irreversible, right? Once you inject a virus that carries that protein, right, into your lungs or into your, I don't know, kidneys, it's going to be there forever. So it's irreversible. So yeah, so this is the second axis in which you can like characterize human enhancement, I think, and I think could be useful in the way you think about how you approach these problems. Okay, and yeah, so basically, I was just thinking about like these all these debates are kind of similar, and if I had to think in terms of like a case for both proposition and opposition on a generic, this house would enhance a human, uh, or if you should do it. Yeah, these are kind of the arguments that I came up with on the go, there's always going to be like a right to their body argument, bodily autonomy argument. Like I can do whatever I want with my body. I can inject it. Um, inject it with whatever I want because it doesn't harm anyone else, just me. Second one, the practical benefits. You get that genetic disorder fixed. You have bigger muscles. You can think and work longer. Your memory is better, etc. Third, fairness, right? So it's kind of a principle that you're going against the birth lottery in that you were born with a certain genetic disease or you were born with smaller muscles and you kind of can't really change that. It's way harder for you than for others to change it. Here you can just, do some kind of intervention that enhances your ability to do that. And that's kind of going against this arbitrary nature of who gets allocated better biological traits. And the opposition usually, I think these are kind of mirroring each other in terms of clash points as well, right? The first point would be about the right not to enhance yourself. So it's about obviously the pressure to conform is a big part, but I think, and that you will always hear in every debate about enhancement, but what you don't hear as much is about this idea of loss of authenticity in terms of what's beautiful, right? So, for example, if we are enhancing and editing germline, and we're trying to get rid of certain, if people are allowed to do that, and people start to like edit certain eye colors, right, or certain skin colors, like it's definitely gonna start to conform to, majority driven uh, majority driven beauty aesthetics, right? So for example, like if you're in China, it would be everyone is gonna just start to edit their baby so that they're just looking like Han Chinese, right? And nobody's gonna like want basically minority beauty aesthetics will not exist, right? Same if you're in the West, right? Everyone's just gonna whiten everyone. So whiten the babies. Second argument, obviously, like this is always comes up, perverse incentives will lead to long-term harm, right? So the idea is everyone's doping, I should get it too, and then you take too much testosterone and you get a heart attack, right? And then there's also always that point that kids like to make about how um, children are amateur amateur sports people, for example, are just gonna like adolescent children are just gonna like start doping because that's the only way to do it, and they're like young kids and like their brains are not formed and it's gonna have long-term problems, something like that. The last point is about unequal society. That's the another advantage for the rich. They can run faster, think better than you, and they have more money. And this type of stuff is probably going to be very expensive in the beginning. Okay. So that kind of like so now I have kind of a bunch of different debates that I've like found on different websites. So my idea initially was to ask if any of the participants would like to practice writing arguments. So the idea would be that I would give you like 15 minutes. I'll give you a motion, 15 minutes, and you just give me like a proposition one speech. on this on one of these topics. I'm wondering if is there anyone who wants to like do that? I see. Okay, what about like I can also just talk about I could also talk about like I want to hear from like students here. I don't think there's much point in me talking to the void. So if you guys don't want to debate, we could just like brainstorm together arguments. Would that be desirable? Okay. Uh,
I think I see some reactions. So yeah, let's try brainstorming then.
I mean, yeah, so for the definition of brainstorming is that you unmute yourself and then you vocalize what you think. So, okay. Uh, let's do this. Um, yeah. Okay. Okay, so I think this one is kind of basic and probably everyone has done it, right? This house will fully legalize the usage of performance enhancing drugs. That's kind of boring. Um, I think this is kind of interesting. Um, I found that there's quite a few like motions about the military's use of performance enhancing drugs. And I think that's quite a balanced debate actually, because the military is allowed to push its recruits to the limit because it's life and death, but also because, well, presumably you volunteered, so you kind of signed a contract to put your life on the line. And in a way, you are just basically lending your body to the military to do whatever they want you to do, right? So performance enhancing drugs have been used in the military for the longest time. Um, a famous case is Nazis actually in the Second World War, where they were engaging in what's called Blitzkrieg against the West, and they were giving out these amphetamine pills called Pervitin, and it basically allowed the uh, Wehrmacht, the German army, to march through the Ardennes forest and into Germany, um, into the Netherlands, but also when they were going eastward to Poland, it just allowed them to overtake the Allied forces so much faster than the French, because like the French, for example, were just like drinking wine. That was their war drug to cope with like anxiety and stress, and the Germans were like high on meth. So yeah, so in active combat, this house supports the use of performance enhancing drugs. Um, I think that's a good one. And I think key in this type of debate is uh, to characterize the uniqueness of why in the military it's allowed and not like how taking a drug in the military is different from taking a drug that enhances the performance in the civil society. Yeah. Um, mm, yeah, this is a lot about like your right to edit your gene codes. It's kind of boring, honestly. It's about like your body autonomy, etc. And this house prefers a world where heritability of IQ 0 is basically uh, saying that is the birth lottery thing, whether it's fair or unfair that you inherit certain traits from your family. Um, so these are a few brain-machine interface debates that I found. Does House prefers a world without Neuralink, for example? Um, yeah, what do you guys think? What do you guys think would be like an argument that like proposition could make, for example, for something like this?
Probably about the private nature of these companies that develop and the access of information that they could have.
So like they have a lot of data from you and they're gonna like use it to for like, you know,
Yeah, I
their
guess
own
so.
private gain, or what do you mean?
I mean,
Okay. That's
yeah,
that's one.
there is the risk of selling it. So
Right. So private company sell data, sell neural data. Yeah.
I guess to follow up this, I
Mm,
have a question on this.
yeah.
What kind of legislation exists on like this genome editing or like is there what kind of protections are already in place?
Well, uh, pretty sure. Okay, I'm not 1,000% certain. I would say I'm like 95% certain that these types of things need to go through the FDA, and it's not easy. And there's what's called clinical trials, for something like this, and yeah, yeah, clinical trials. And it's like hard to get through it because there's like three phases of clinical trials. You need to first ensure that it's safe. Then you need to ensure that it's efficacious in relation to a placebo, and then you need to follow it up long term if these gadgets are um, like they don't produce long term problems. Yeah. So yeah. Any other arguments for this motion? Like let's come up with a few more arguments for proposition.
Would an
Anyone
argument
else?
about social inequality also work here? How it's like
Yeah.
the rich people mainly using the Neuralink?
Yes. Rich neural linkers, right? So for sure, that's gonna be a problem, right? Not only do they have a million Tesla stocks, they also all have Neuralink and they can drive their Teslas with their Neuralinks, right? Or like, yeah, they can get more work done and they get all the promotions and they outsmart you and they can run faster than you, right? So the gap gets wider. Anything else? Any other arguments that you think are strong? Okay. Okay, what about opposition? So you need to opt this. What do you think is the most important thing? Anyone?
So all the like practical benefits of helping people with say paralysis or something like that to communicate, to talk with their relatives, to just like all the
Yeah,
uses
very
in
good.
the yes in the medical field, and that's probably a pretty big impact then.
Yeah, so very good. And it's also good that you characterize, right? So you describe these patients. It's like I think the way to make the way to make this very strong and very difficult to deal with is to spend a lot of time explaining how we're talking about people that are paraplegic, they can't move limbs, they can't communicate with their loved ones. You sell this argument through the ethos of how desperate their situation is, right? But yeah, 100%. There's massive medical benefits to being able um, to have brain-machine interfaces. Also, another case is spinal cord injury, right? People can start actually walking around with a cane on their own, using these brain-machine interface technology. So it's not just paraplegics. One thing that I would maybe add is like it's physical, like I've said, right? But there's also like mental benefits here. So, like I've said, deep brain stimulation, certain disorders like depression or like Parkinson's disease, you can put in an electrode, you can stimulate it. If you had a Neuralink electrode implanted, that could help you, right? So it's not just about physical disabilities, it can also be about debilitating psychiatric conditions. Those two, Parkinson's disease and um, and depression are the ones that come to mind. I think I think epilepsy also is one of the diseases that benefits from deep brain stimulation. Anything else? What's like a principled argument here, right?
So my personal right to my bodily autonomy, which right, this one, like which leads me to
Yeah,
a personal right to have a Neuralink if I want a Neuralink, or no?
exactly. If I want to be a Neuralinker, I can be a Neuralinker, right? Okay, cool. I mean, honestly, pretty much this is it. The debate is really boils down to selling the need, how vividly are you going to depict and characterize the patients that benefit from it, and and you're going to have to answer for so yeah, so basically you're going to have to tell them that the need is very, very massive for this type of technology medically, and it has to be because like the proposition framing here is, oh, everyone is just gonna lose their neural data, or and everyone's gonna have to conform to be a neural linker, right? And that's terrible because everyone is gonna scroll TikTok in their dreams, right? Um, so it's like everyone gets affected, while in oppositions, like a few are suffering right now because of no access to this technology, and their suffering is very great, right? So it's kind of a quantity versus quality weighing that you need to do in this. Okay, and the last one, mental or moral enhancement debates. So I found this also on the internet, and yeah, it's basically this house would ban the research and production and use of moral enhancement drugs. So there's an info slide. It's basically about um, uh, basically if you had drugs that can kind of affect your moral reasoning, for example, make you be more empathetic or make you be less aggressive or more aggressive, should we be researching and producing these types of drugs? I found this interesting because it is kind of different. I think quite often these types of debates are going to be like in debate land where things are assumed to work. I do have to say that the premise of a morally enhancing drug is not that far-fetched because certain classes of narcotics have been shown to change the moral outlook on your life. These are some of them actually. So psychedelics, for example, they make you more. It's a commonly documented correlation actually that in clinical trials that basically people who undergo psychedelic therapy, they will experience an openness and oneness with the world, which often, for example, translates to them becoming more ecologically, I have to put like they care more about nature, right? Because they feel like they're connected with the world and they're grounded and they're like, I'm not gonna litter and I'm gonna become vegan or vegetarian. That happens, right? To this connectedness and oneness, and it affects their moral outlook. Um, MDMA, another type of drug that's used in counseling for people who have extreme trauma, but also um, yeah, like extreme trauma. It MDMA can help you cope with it, and it's commonly referred to as like empathogen, right? So you know, re off label, if you go on Reddit, you're gonna see a lot of, for example, people who take this drug and then they will just like sit with their loved one and they will just like talk and they will like talk things out, for example, and solve their relationship problems, right? The point here is that this affects how caring you are and how listening you are to your partner or to another human being, right? So it's not like 100% you're gonna like jump in front of the train for another person, but it's subtle and it is kind of moving there, because these substances are getting better and better. So yeah. Either way, let's go back to the debate. Let's come up with a few arguments, shall we? So like what the proposition case? What are some arguments that proposition can run in this?
Maybe that there's like that would likely be a lot of pressure to conform, especially in this context when you're doing this for someone else. So you're like it's other people's expectations that you would be nicer and kinder, and so it's kind of hard to say no to that.
Right? Because you don't want to be an asshole. Yeah, very good point, right? Because morality is uh, kind of subjective, right? And exactly, very good point, very good point. And see, you need to draw the distinction, right? How in this particular case, when it comes to morally and enhancing drugs, you will definitely need to resist certain pressures from society. Anything else? Think like more basically. Like, why else would you ban something like that? So an obvious thing is like for like any kind of drug debate, like long-term harms are unknown, right? So, I think can pass a clinical trial and it can show you that, oh, this person is going to be like more, I don't know, kind in whatever subjective scale the psychiatrist measured you in. But you don't know if there's going to be like 5 or 10 years down the line, you're going to have, for example, an increased risk of dementia or something goes wrong with your, neurovasculature as a result of a side effect that was unknown to the scientists, right? There's always that risk. And in a way, this is kind of not necessary, you could argue, because you could have other alternatives. Like this is not a life and death situation where you definitely need to take this long-term risk. you could maybe just, I don't know, read a book and learn how to not be like, an asshole. Yeah. So that's one. What about opposition? Why do you need them?
So maybe just the practical side, like things like anger issues are really hard to overcome through therapy and these sort of treatments. And they also really limit your capacity to form relationships, which is really mentally hard for people. So this just increases your basically chances of forming these relationships.
Yeah. I think that is a good frame. That's like like there's like we have an epidemic of loneliness in society these days. And if you could, spike the water system of a city with some funny substance, and then everyone just becomes slightly more happy and caring and kind to each other, uh, that would probably look like a better world, right? And everyone's going to be less lonely. Okay. I'm just thinking, yeah. Yeah, and the anger issues, obviously, yeah, that's another good point. If you could reduce your anger issues, maybe you should. On the other hand, maybe, if you have some anger issues, maybe there's some reason for your anger, right? Like if you're being abused at work, maybe you should be a bit angry. Um, yeah. Okay, I don't know. Do I have anything else that I looked up? Safety, risk of social harmonization. Yeah, not really. Yeah. All right, cool. I don't have anything else other than this, but as you can see, basically it all boils down to this when it comes to these types of debates. Um, and it's all about painting the picture about who's being enhanced and why. Yeah, pretty much. So thank you for your time. I think I just hit the 1 hour mark, and that's kind of enough, I think, for today. Thank you for participating and for having me. And yeah,
Thank
anything
you.
else? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.